I gave a talk recently and I was asked about my discovery process in finding my purpose and becoming the best version of myself. And it got me thinking about my structure and how I spent several months in my own head just kind of designing a structure and a game plan that would help me develop the best version of myself. So we're gonna call this How to Build the Best You. I think there's some main elements that you got to think about. The very first thing is you have to envision exactly what you want to be. And when I say envision what you want to be, this can be within the 6 months later, it can be 5 years later, it can be 3 years, it doesn't matter. Just set a time frame that gives you enough runway to actually implement these steps and put this into action and to set goals to be the best you. So you have to break this vision into categories. How I broke this up was 3 main categories, but you can add more. So my 3 main were mentally, physically, and spiritually. If you want to add professionally, you can add that, but I wanted to focus on me, myself, and I internally and physically, and I knew that this would help me professionally, so I decided to kind of sideline the envisioning of what I wanted to be professionally because, like I said, I knew that these 3 main categories, physically, mentally, and spiritually, would really help me professionally being an entrepreneur. Third, it has to be about you. It's very easy to look at what other people are doing, people that may be at a certain level in their career or in their fitness that you want to be at, and just kind of write down the main attributes that you see that they have that you want. But you got to remember, this is your plan. You have to find the inspiration within yourself to actually implement this plan and put it into the action. So turn off social media, turn off the TV, turn off everything. Stop looking for just keywords that you want to add into this and really think deeply about what this means to you. So this is how I broke this into categories. I just wrote this out on my iPad, physically, mentally, spiritually. Physically is probably the most easy to figure out. Obviously, there's a lot of information you can take in, and it's easy to say I need to lose weight or I want to do this in my training. And for me, I wanted to become a marathon runner. I've never been a big runner. I made a lot of excuses of why I couldn't run. So I said, you know what? In 5 years, I would love to be running marathons as often as I can. Speaking of being well-versed in training, I knew that I wanted to focus on more functional training, to be just kind of more physically fit no matter the circumstance and not really worrying about weightlifting and training. So that's how I envisioned myself in 5 years. Beyond that, this is gonna sound a little funny, I wanted to be comfortable taking my shirt off. So I wrote down being comfortable shirtless. Lastly, for my physical vision of myself in 5 years, I knew that I wanted to become way more flexible. So that meant lots of stretching. So I put flexible through stretching. I felt like after these 4 things, that was a good kind of basis to start with. And I already started envisioning some of the goals and action items I could set for myself. But I went ahead and moved on to mentally, what I wanted to be mentally. First and foremost, I knew I wanted to be more focused. The great thing about writing down focus is it put me in the mindset of what does focus look like. And most focused people are naturally more calm. So I wrote mentally, I wanted to be more calm. One thing that's very important to me and that I realized off of asking people around me and the kind of the key people in the circle in my life is that I needed to focus on being more present. So I wrote down more present. That also meant that I needed to be more clear in my conversations and just in my mental state. And I added another dot because I knew that the word open meant a lot to me. I really don't know how I define that and how it relates to me mentally, but open was super important to me. The beautiful thing about this structure is once you write it down, you can always revisit it. I suggest giving yourself some extra space because you can always revisit it and add things in and fine tune things. So moving on to spiritually, this is probably the most difficult to figure out because spirituality means so much to so many different people. For me, it was more empathetic. Off the heels of that, I knew that I wanted to show way more gratitude. So how do you become more empathetic and show more gratitude? New perspectives meant a lot for me. I knew that new perspectives, saying yes to more things that took me out of my comfort zone would challenge my spirituality and also just put me in a place to gain more perspective. Spirituality has been one of those things that's constantly up and down for me, and I just wanted to feel a little more grounded in it. So I used the word sound for me. I'm a huge music fan, and I feel more connected to some spiritual sense through sound, but sound also means kind of more grounded for me. So I wrote down sound. Lastly, I wrote more connected. Once again, this kind of goes along with open. Not really sure what that means, but it was just a word that as I was thinking about this stuff, it constantly came to mind. So I wrote it down. So we got our 3 categories. If you added more, perfectly fine. Just take your categories and right underneath that, you want to write action items. This is where we're going to take a look at all of the bullets that we wrote down and figure out what we have to do, or what we have to cut out even of our life in order to make what we envision the best version of ourselves to be a reality in the timeline that we set for ourselves. So let's get into it. Physically, in order to be a marathon runner, I knew I needed to run more. For functional training, I knew that I needed to research more techniques that were more aligned with functional training. Obviously, some people may be more informed about what functional training looks like and what the best strategy and tactics are for functional training, but I will put the step that comes after that because obviously you don't want to just get stuck in the research loop. You got to create the action item to actually act. And that simply meant practicing functional training. Stretching has never really been a thing that I've done often, and even when I have done it, I probably didn't do it long enough to really reap the benefits of it. So there's my action item. I need to stretch often and stretch for a minimum of 30 minutes. I just went ahead and set that expectation for myself. Honestly, creating action items for the mental and spiritual categories are a little more difficult. So I knew I wrote down focused, calm, present, clear, and open. I just let that marinate a little bit. What does that mean? What can I do in order to be all of those things? What this really meant to me was I needed to disconnect more. Underneath this, I made sure to write what this actually meant because it didn't mean disconnect from relationships, and I bet you can guess. It obviously meant disconnect from social media a little more, disconnect from just television in general, and it also meant disconnecting from toxic people. This next action item I knew could be really under mentally and spiritually, but I went ahead and put it under mentally because I felt like being more focused, calm, and present and clear and open mentally really meant that I needed to meditate more. This next action item was a little difficult to think of, but I knew how super important it was, and that was to practice mindful consumption. So up top, obviously I wrote disconnect more from social media and television. That's where you consume pretty much everything. But there are good elements to social media and to television. Like on YouTube, for instance, there's tons of good content for you to consume that will help you get to the next step in your career, that will help you get to the next step in your self-development journey. But you have to be mindful about what you're consuming. Spiritual action items. What does this look like? First and foremost, I look at my list and I see empathy and gratitude. For me, that means to give more. I believe in the power of giving, so I knew I wanted to give more. That was super important to me. As far as gaining new perspective, I wanted to say yes more. I wanted to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. I wanted to try new things, to put myself in different situations that I may be uncomfortable being in. So I put meditate under mentally, but I'm also going to go ahead and write it under spiritually because I know how important it is to me. So looking back at my list where I wrote sound and connected under spiritually, for me, this meant doing something I've been doing for quite some time, not so much since the whole coronavirus thing, but that's going to float tanks or sensory deprivation tanks. These have been super, super beneficial for me and kind of my just spiritual journey and becoming a more spiritual person. Lastly, under spiritually, I wrote alignment. What I mean by this, it's aligning myself with people who understand the importance of a spiritual journey and what that does for you individually and bringing them into my circle and having conversations with them. Aligning yourself with like-minded people in order to help you get to the next step in your self-development journey. The reason it's important to create the goals that you set for yourself outside of this list is because this becomes the foundation. For physically, you want to run more. Run more for me meant running Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. I had to do that. Mentally, as far as practicing mindful consumption, how I approached this was I wrote this down every day. When I was planning my day, every single day, I wrote practice mindful consumption, because it just told myself mentally that I needed to be aware of what I was watching. As far as spiritually goes, saying yes more, this simply meant not saying no as fast. I gave myself a little leadway, a little runway in order to really contemplate and say, I would really say no to this, but let me just let it set a little bit. Let me think of the reasons why I should versus the reasons why I can't. if you have this as your foundation, you can always refer back to this. You're not setting goals, accomplishing them, and be like, oh, what's next? What's next is you go back to this and you set new goals that help you level up this process. And that means you have to check in. You have to hold yourself accountable. So how do we do that? This is a pretty simple concept. When I say check in, I mean literally set a date and a frequency of when you want to check in under each category. The reason this structure works for me is because it allows me enough flexibility, but it gives me enough foundation for the days that get hectic and the days that I really don't know and things are just a super hectic roller coaster. I know what I can refer back to. I have the foundation that I can look at and know what I need to do to course correct my day and my month, my week, whatever is going on in life. I know that no matter what is happening around me, business-wise, relationship-wise, I know that I have a goal and an objective and a vision of what the best version of me looks like in 5 years. And as long as I have this written down to constantly refer to, I have the ability to strive to be the best version of me. And it opens up the door for me to live with extreme intention over impulse every single day. And that's the most important thing. For me, this is what living with intention over impulse looks like, but I would love to know what it looks like for you. So jump into the conversation in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and hit subscribe. And remember, you get what you give, so give good.